So,
Hello,
uh,
everyone. Welcome in. Welcome in.
I've done a lot of writing, in my life.
Uh-huh. I
Hello,
started as a
everyone.
music major too.
That's pretty awesome. I wanted to be a
Yeah.
communications major, so I wanted to do the
Uh-huh.
sports broadcasting for Syracuse basketball team,
Oh, yeah.
or college basketball when I was a kid.
That
Because
was a very specific goal.
oh, it was very
Mhm.
specific goal, very specific school too. And I didn't get into the program I wanted, which kind of sucked.
Welcome in, everyone. We are going to be discussing our story that we broke today. So we'll give it a few minutes so plenty of people can hop on.
And um the new format that they have for the in-browser live for Substack is pretty nice.
Yeah,
Um, this is the first time I'm doing it this way.
I'm hoping that. Yeah, I'm hoping I set everything up right.
It looks good. I think we're live. People are here.
Okay,
Um,
good. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. So we can go ahead and start just doing a recap of the news that came out today. How many days was it? It was about 46. Was that? Yeah, like
it
46 days
was
ago.
yeah, mid-October timeframe when these
October
strikes
20.
happen. Yeah,
Right.
it's been a while.
So yeah. So about a month and a half ago, I got a document sent by a source from the DoD, a very trusted source, and it was incredibly shocking. And I knew in that moment, I've talked before about the conflation of being a citizen and being a journalist. And another interesting overlay is that I'm a veteran and a journalist. And in that moment, when I received that document, I had to put on my veteran hat first, because the contents of that document were very disturbing, and I was very well aware would have the potential to throw a bomb into someone's, or a group of people's career. And so I wanted to proceed as carefully and cautiously and at the absolute heart of everything I did was to protect the individuals who were so brave as to trust me with this information, and trust me to get it to where it needed to be. And so that was my endeavor. I traveled to Washington. That was part of one of my super secret missions. When I traveled to Washington was to try and assess how I could get that information onto the desk that it needed to get onto. And luckily, through the connections that I've made on Substack, I was able to sort of go through this chain of secure veterans, to get that document where it needed to be in time for a closed door Armed Services Committee meeting. And there at that meeting, they could read the document and read the evidence that video and photo documentation of the onboarding of two survivors of a boat strike was ordered to be deleted and was, in fact, deleted. And the document that I received included written statement from individuals involved, and they indicated their discomfort with the order that they received. They very carefully and thoroughly dictated the events of that day and how they did push back against some of those orders. And ultimately, it was told that it came down from the admiral, was the exact wording, to go ahead and delete video and photo evidence. So if for those that don't know me, I'm Melissa Corrigan, and I am working with Blue Ant Media, and I was a crypto tech with a TSSCI clearance when I was in the Navy long time ago during Operation Iraqi Freedom. And so for me, any type of order to delete any type of content is already a huge, huge red flag. And I believe that's why the sources involved reached out to me because they knew I would immediately recognize the situation for what it was, and it was an enormous red flag situation.
And
Um,
the seriousness of it, which
yes, right,
would
the
would be
levity,
needed to, like, keep it in the correct circles,
right,
to not reveal or hurt this individual or groups of individuals who are coming forward. Um, and yeah, I and as a prior U.S. Army sergeant trained in human intelligence collection, this
right.
is super disturbing.
Right.
Um,
Let me introduce you because for everyone who's already read the piece, I referenced this is Nick Paro, and he is a US Army veteran that is specifically trained in well, I'll let him give you the whole bio of what he was trained in, but I knew that the information that he had in his head would be so vital to this conversation and to inform what we need to be looking at specifically with this incident. And so he wrote the most thorough, educational, enlightening piece that really lays out not only the protocol that should be followed when detainees are brought on board a Navy vessel or in any military installation, and and he lays out a lot of the rules of war and laws of war that apply to this scenario. So I'm going to let you run with it, introduce yourself and your experience, and, yeah, let's talk about what a troubling situation this is.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for that introduction, Melissa. And also thanks for having me on with you. I appreciate and for quoting my article in all of this. I know you and I have talked throughout some of this process, and Banner and Backbone and my publications are here to support all of this and the work that's being done, because it's vitally important that we know the truth of what's going on. So, like I said, I'm Nick Paro. I was a U.S. Army sergeant. I trained in human intelligence collection, and have advanced training in interrogation techniques. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2014, where I was stationed at Fob Shank. And I have direct experience doing on base badging and personnel hiring and screening for local nationals out of Afghanistan, as well as initial field in processing for biometric collection, lie detection, and other sorts of um, biographical and necessary information that is supposed to be collected when someone is detained, when someone is held and set for processing to either be given into release of U.S. custody for military sake, or our partner militaries if we're in partnership with someone during an actual armed conflict. Um, and so I have some experience doing this because I've had to do this, and I have spoken with people and done this in processing and done the biometric collection. Um, and when Melissa brought to me the idea that this even had happened, my my brain went haywire for a minute, because every single thing about this screamed illegal. Every single thing about it screamed, there is something going on that is severely wrong. Like, way, way, way out of the norm wrong. And so I wanted to put out a bunch of good, solid, just simple information that people could understand, so that any layperson, any normal citizen or civilian who has never had a military experience, or even those with military experience who are serving right now and who might not know enough about the law of war themselves and the things that they are supposed to uphold, I wanted to write this so people knew. And there was some very specific terminology that is
Yeah.
being used in this reporting and in what the source has revealed to have gone on. And I wanted to get the truth out because I'm tired of the narrative being written by people who either want to obfuscate the truth, or just want to lie. Um, and I don't want to do either. I want to arm people with knowledge that is correct and that they
Right.
can use to defend, and not only defend, but go on offense for the US and for the Constitution. And part of this is us going on offense, is giving people the tools to do this. So I wrote this article on Banner and Backbone, about wounded and unknown and the true treatment of what are called unprivileged belligerents, which is a really important term,
Right.
because that's what is used throughout all of this. And it's a legal gray area, which has been cited and used over the years at this point to eliminate, quote, terrorists. Um, and this is where it comes into why these folks are being called narco terrorists, is so that the Pentagon, specifically Pete Hegseth and then Donald Trump, can use this as some sort of legal cover or justification without actually doing the proof portion.
Right.
And they're just doing, as you and Shane reported or talked about on your show last week on the Rant Act, is trust me, bro. The policy is
Right.
trust me, bro.
Mhm.
And my policy is not trust me, bro. It's trust the facts, bro.
Right.
And the facts in this are, um, that legal frameworks, U.S. doctrine, U.S. military policy, the U.S. Defense Department's law of war, and international humanitarian law have been violated. Um, and it's also really important to note, before we go any further, that Melissa and I have been very specific, and I'm going to always be very specific on this when I talk about, are we at war or are we in an armed conflict of any sort? Because the answer is no.
Right.
Um, and there has been no congressional approval. There has no been congressional authorization or oversight or appropriations. And we are continuing to indiscriminately, in my opinion, murder people in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. So I wanted to get the truth out there so people knew what was going on. Um,
Right.
and are there any specific sections you want me to focus on, about this real
Well, I
quick as we
wanna
go into it?
I wanna go over how it, plays into the document that I
Yeah.
received. So, the document begins with a pretty thorough, layout of what happened, sort of a timeline of what happened that day. So, at around 1500, and that's 3 PM, uh they received 2 of these detainees on board the USS Iwo Jima. This is on the 17th of October, and they were held on the Iwo Jima for just over 24 hours and departed the next day around 16:30. Um, the shipboard personnel, sprang to action doing what they had been trained to do and what was shipboard policy to do, which is to obtain video and photo documentation of the onboarding of the detainees. At the time when they began taking that action, the Marines that were bringing the detainees on board actually pushed back, and there was a bit of a back and forth between some officers and upper enlisted in that moment, and the PAO, which is the press affairs officer or public affairs officer, um, was consulted and insisted that they did proceed with video and photo documentation. So they did go ahead and document the onboarding of the detainees. But it was very shortly thereafter, only about 2 hours after, the order came down to delete that footage. There was substantial pushback by the shipboard personnel that was involved, and there was a consultation with a JAG officer, and they were instructed that the order came down from the admiral to go ahead with the deletion of that. So they did delete the content and then put together a written statement outlining what happened with the incident. Um, and the justification that was given by JAG for the reason it was okay to delete video and photo of detainees was that they were being classified as unprivileged belligerents. And I had never encountered that term. Now, mind you, I was active duty Navy while we were at war, and part of who we were at war with was terrorists. Um, and so it's totally crazy to me that that particular term just flew totally under my radar until I received this document. I started doing extensive research into what that term was and how have we used this term before, and I fell into an absolute rabbit hole. This term has been used in connection to Guantanamo, in connection with Syria, in connection with Bosnia, in connection with Afghanistan and Iraq. So this term seems to be a little bit of a get out of jail free card that the American military has used in the past to be able to not fully adhere to the appropriate treatment of people in accordance with the Geneva Convention. And every one of the situations in which this term has been used by the military before has come out to be essentially an embarrassment to our nation and to our military. And there's a Brigadier General Kenneth Watkin. He's of the Canadian Army, but of course, this is in reference to international law. So he is the foremost expert on the actual term unprivileged belligerents. He's published papers through Harvard University on, during a symposium on this topic. I did reach out to him. Unfortunately, he did say that he had no desire to get involved with the press or speak out on this issue in that way, but he did write and publish an article co-authored with Jeffrey Korn just a couple of days ago, where he condemned the boat strikes entirely. He didn't specifically speak to the topic of unprivileged belligerents in that article, but he did condemn and say that these boat strikes are, on the face of it, unlawful. And so you did a deep dive. So go ahead and you take over and drive this boat on, if this had happened, if you were there and you received two detainees, what should have been the process that they should have been received into any type of U.S. military vessel, facility, anything?
Yeah. So let's first start with that's a great recap of everything going on, too, Melissa. Thank you. Let's start with the classifications of people and how important those are. So, again, first, before we dive into any of this, we are not at war or a legally authorized state of an armed conflict, which means that everyone is considered a civilian unless there is really strong proof that they are a combatant. When you're at war and in an active state of an armed conflict that has been authorized and appropriated by Congress, then you can start using things like combatant or unprivileged belligerent or unlawful combatant is another term, or unidentified assailant, or things of those nature. And I'll get into the big definitions here. I broke it down very, very simply, and I used the U.S. law, DoD's law of war. I'll post the article. I just dropped the link for everyone in the chat here too. Is go take a look at it. So there's three really distinctive categories of human beings when it comes to military action. Civilians, there's really two we have made up somewhere in between since World War II as a world policy, that there's somewhere in between the two types, but there used to be just civilian and combatant, where you were a lawful target or not. Um, and because we live in the US, where the US has a presumption of innocence baked into and built into the Constitution, the military still falls under civilian purview and civilian law. So you have to follow the Constitution, which means the US military has a system of due process built into it. And part of that process is determining the classification of a human being between civilian, unidentified, and combatant. So, what is a civilian? A civilian is the default classification of a person. It is always the initial presumed status, always, unless they are in a uniform and with a weapon and they have met like very specific criteria. But this is the default status, unless there is it's not reasonable doubt like civilian court, but it does go up to the chain of command to make a command decision on whether someone is a legal and lawful target to be targeted in a time of war or a state of armed conflict. Again, we are in neither of those. So these are civilians. There's DoD policy, Law of War Manual Policy 4.4.1, which is civilians are persons who are not combatants. 4.4.2, which is civilians may not be made the object of attack unless and for such time as they take a direct part in hostilities. DoD Law of War Manual 5.4.3.2. In case of doubt, when a person is a civilian, the person shall be considered a civilian, which means that the first guess is civilian. So let's take this into context of where we're at. The next step is a unidentified belligerent, which is what they're being what these individuals and these civilians, in my eyes, are being qualified as. So an unidentified or unprivileged belligerent, unlawful combatant, or unknown actor are the status gray area, where, say, you're not wearing a uniform, much like we would consider spies, where a spy would be covertly a military member, a member of a military force who is covertly operating as a civilian. Notice I said they are a member of a military force. That does not have to be a state force specifically, but they have to be a party to the war or armed conflict at large and part of it overall. It cannot just be like unprivileged belligerents, and this is a very specific term to identify someone who wears civilian clothing, does not directly participate, and will regain privileged combat status upon returning to friendly lines, which means they must already be a combatant who has then gone undercover, such as a spy, not a person riding a boat in the middle of the Caribbean who we could easily identify and have proof of from visual and surveillance mechanisms to prove that they have these drugs and these sort of things. And then we should be capturing them alive, because the
Right.
penalty for drug smuggling is not death. The penalty for drug smuggling is imprisonment. So one, we're just killing people on the high seas. There's
And
a
we
lot of
just, the Coast Guard just announced a couple days ago that they had the largest drug bust in recent history. I think they said in a couple of decades, like 20,000 kilos of cocaine was seized, and somehow they did it without blowing up the boat, without killing anyone. They pulled up alongside the boat. There was some level of engagement with, it wasn't entirely a peaceful transaction, but there was a level of engagement, and they were able to board the boat. They were able to demonstrate in real time that the procedures that they had for doing this worked. They work to this day, and I thought it was really interesting that the Coast Guard is out here still running law enforcement activities and doing it the correct way without having to weaponize the Navy and the Marine Corps in the process. Uh-oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, I muted my microphone. Sorry about that, everyone. Playing with new technology. Can you hear me now? Is you asked the initial question of how does this all relate back to what is actually going on in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific and what should have happened. And so now that we know the statuses of people, here's the thing. Unprivileged belligerents still need to be treated with doctrine, and they're presumed to be of POW status until a competent tribunal has said otherwise.
Right.
And there was no competent tribunal that was adjourned for either of these individuals, because if there was, there would be congressional record for it. The Congress would have been notified and would be able to release public information around that competent tribunal and what their findings were. The US public has a right to know what decisions are being made. And that's why Congress ultimately is the one who is allowed to levy war, is because they get to see that information and make an informed decision for the populace. That has not been made. So when these individuals were brought on board of the boats, first thing that should have happened when they were captured was they should have basically been tagged. You basically put a tag on someone, say, and you cuff
Right.
them and you put them into a secure way that they aren't going to harm themselves or anybody else. And then you get a biometric scanning device and you biometrically scan and insert that person into a centralized record system for every bad guy that we've ever identified.
Right.
And that way, it's a quick reference guide to, is this person on a actual list? Is this person
Right.
on one of our watch lists? Is this person an identified um, say narcotics trafficker or terrorist? Is this person a big fish? We have to do those so that we do not just kill people or release people who should be in custody. And
Right.
all of this, there's paper trail from the person who received, from the sailor or the Marine who received and onboarded that individual into the detainment system of the US military. They sign for that person. You sign that person over to the next person. The military is very good about handwritten paper trails everywhere. They still do it all over the place. You have to hand sign records saying that this person has been transferred from one individual to another. At least when I was in, it was hand signed. It may all be digital now, but it was still hand signed when I was in. And so units must document capture, who the person is, what their status was when they were captured, what their medical status was. Are they injured? Do they require medical treatment? And if they do, they need to be treated in a way that is in accordance with law, which is there is no preference to either good guy or bad guy. They are just a injured person who needs help. Um, and Geneva Convention and the DoD law do not distinguish from combatants, UBs, civilians, our own personnel, or anybody if they are injured in a lawful war scenario. And so, even in this situation, they would have, because it's in international waters, they would have needed to follow international humanitarian law, which falls into the categories of US law at this point. We have accounted for humanitarian law as part of US law in a lot of ways and in our DoD policy. Documentation is a huge piece of this from start to finish. Medical documentation, every single thing that they did to this individual while they were in the medical facility and medical bay should have and must have been documented.
Right.
They also would have spoken to this individual, because you do not release intelligence capabilities or possible intelligence assets without speaking to them, which
Right.
means a interrogator would have been used, most likely, if that happened. And if a non-legally authorized interrogator was used, I would like to know that information too, because that's highly, highly, highly illegal. You have to be certified in the area that you are interrogating out of. Like, if I wanted to do an interrogation in Afghanistan, I had to, and I didn't, because they handed over detention facilities to the Afghan army right as I got there. So I did not do that portion of the job that I trained for in that situation. I was supposed to get certified in country to prove that I can do interrogations and I can do them correctly. And if somebody is doing possible interrogations without the right authorization, the right training, or the right background, they could be doing some really, really illegal things.
Right.
And we have seen what those illegal things look like, such as waterboarding at Abu Ghraib
Right.
and what the MPs did there to those detained individuals. And on top of all of this, the final step before anything else, so all of this information about documentation and how they should be handled, the final step in all of this is status determination. is they needed to be in process, they needed to be documented, biometrics needed to be captured, all of that. And then a competent tribunal must be adjourned and convened for a status determination to determine if this person who should have been, if we were in a arms conflict, should have been treated as a POW
Right.
unless proven otherwise. And if they weren't, they should have initially been treated as a civilian. And none of
Right.
this seems to have happened. And from what the source has revealed and what we are able to report on all of this, is none of that happened and got deleted, which
Right.
is a crime, is a
Well, what
really
struck
big
me was,
crime.
through the document was, that the shipboard personnel, particularly lower enlisted, attempted repeatedly to do the right thing.
Yeah.
They attempted to go ahead with their training with what they knew to be correct protocol, and I absolutely blame higher ups. I do
Oh,
not place any
absolutely.
of the blame on any of the lower enlisted in this situation because they absolutely were doing um pushing to do the correct procedure. So
Yeah.
a lot flew out at me initially. The very first thing,
And before you
uh
go any further, that's a really important point you just made, is
yeah,
that all of the lower enlisted service members up to the mid-ranked officers and
yes,
commissioned members all said, no, this is not what
right,
we want or can or should do. This is against protocol. This is
right,
against what we have been trained. And they were overridden. They
yes,
did the right thing. And by coming forward, whoever the individuals are that are coming forward for these things, these service members need to be treated with the respect that they deserve for
right,
doing this,
right,
for coming forward and putting their careers at risk, because there is a high chance that someone like this in a situation, in an environment like this, at least where our government is not respecting laws, whistleblowers are not being protected in the same way, and they need to know that we
right,
have their back and we're not going to out them as individuals. We are going to treat their information with trust and with the dignity it deserves, and then we're going to get it out there when we can and talk
right,
about it. So
right.
I think, Melissa, you made a super important point, though, is these service members are doing the right things. It's
Yes,
the it's leadership from Hegseth down, from the
right.
top down. This is not a bottom up issue. This is a top down issue,
Absolutely.
and it's coming
And
from
the
the
and
top.
the and the first things that jumped out at me is if you are doing nothing wrong, why would you delete? I mean, that's a common sense issue. You don't even have to have ever served in the military to ask that question. If you're not doing anything wrong, why delete photo and video? That's the initial thing that jumped out is what happened in that 24-hour period on one of our Navy vessels that they felt that needed to be deleted. So that's number 1.
Yeah,
Number 2, the Colombian president had came out and made a statement that the detainee was returned to them uh, on a ventilator, essentially on life support, and unable to speak, testify, offer anything. I haven't heard any update for that individual. The other individual was repatriated to Ecuador, and the Ecuadorian president has said that he released him because there was virtually no evidence that he did anything wrong and he was not going to keep him contained. But I mean, even here in America, a low level drug dealer on the corner, selling dime bags, if he gets arrested, is going to have a mugshot of that arrest. So the
yeah.
fact that the lowest level drug dealer when arrested, is given some form of due process and had their photograph taken where it remains in a database in the local police station. It's completely mind boggling to me that this Department of Defense is alleging that these are sophisticated narco terrorists on boats with hundreds or thousands of kilos of drugs. And you have two of those individuals in your custody and you do not document, you do not interrogate, you just get
And
rid of them.
Yeah, as a prior interrogator, the one thing you do not do if you want to understand the business structure or organizational structure or network structure of a organization, you don't let the low level people go because they're most willing to talk because they have
Right.
nothing in it other than somebody's that giving them money. Like they're being paid. If that's what the case is, you don't kill those people. You talk to them.
Right.
You interrogate them to get real intelligence so that real decisions can be made, but that's not what we're doing because it's
Right.
not about intelligence. It's not even about real narco terrorism because one, that's a made up term. And two, if there was evidence, they would have kept those two men
Right.
in
Your
custody and
entire
sent them to
premise of
Guantanamo
these
Bay.
attacks hinge on that.
Yeah.
You get 2 of them that are alive. I mean, you
Wouldn't
would
you
think
want to
that's like
prove it?
striking gold. You would take them to Congress, you would parade them around, you would take all those photos and all that video as evidence because their entire argument hinges on this, and this is how they are able to classify these individuals as unprivileged belligerents, is because they are claiming, they being the Department of Defense, is claiming that these boats sailing northward towards the United States with drugs on board is an act of hostility that is so egregious it warrants military activity. And if you want to make that argument and you get the opportunity to present evidence to say, here, look, we got 2 of them. Here are their photos. Here's pictures of what they had on board. Wouldn't you use that as your smoking gun to go forward with more of these strikes? The logic fails on every single level,
Yes.
every level.
Yeah. The logic fails, but also any attempt at justification fails too. Like the at least any other prior regime or administration, even the prior Trump regime, tried to justify actions that it was taking. Now it's not even doing that. Now it's just expecting people because this is what a dictator does and an authoritarian does is say, we don't need all those slow decision making processes. See how
Right,
slow they make us go. See how little we can get done. See how little we can impact the war on narco terrorism if we have to go through Congress and get approval for all these strikes. Well, yeah, because otherwise it's murder. Like
right,
that's it. That's all it is otherwise it's murder. And if we had somebody else around our country who was able to authorize the death of 85 individuals, roughly or more, or is going to continue to grow from there, they would be in jail as a serial killer and they would be tried for serious, serious crimes. And in the military, it is illegal to kill a civilian. There is a very, very severe penalty for killing
right,
civilians knowingly in the military. That is the death penalty. It is
right,
not a penalty that has just never been used before. It has been used before. This is a this is a law that the US military has used and followed.
right.
And I I think it's important that we are very precise with how we talk about this and that it is very illegal what has gone on. And
Yes,
it is every regulation has been thrown to the wind. And Pete Hegseth is responsible for these decisions because you do not circumvent a competent tribunal as an admiral. You do not have the power to circumvent a competent tribunal as an admiral. You do have that power as the SecDef or as the president or as the vice president, possibly, or even Stephen Miller, because we don't really know who ordered these strikes ultimately yet,
right,
because all we have heard is that the admiral brought it down. That came from somebody. That had to come from somebody, and that decision is not made on that ship. And if there was no competent tribunal that was adjudicated for either of these individuals, one, we're past the question that we should be asking. Is the first the secondary question is, did we handle these individuals incorrectly? The primary question is, are any of the strikes that have gone on legal? And if they are
Right.
not, why are we allowing murder to continue from someone who can and should be impeached? And yes, Senator Tom Cotton sounded like a frickin' idiot when he came out from these
Yes.
last hearings and said, oh, this just looked like what the military does. I'm from Arkansas. We
No.
can do better. We can do
Yeah.
better. There are other people who are more competent than
Well,
him,
I think
such as
there's
Hallie
something
Schaffner.
fundamentally, off with your moral conscience if you come out of a hearing where you witnessed a video of the end of human life and you come out beaming and hopping and, oh,
Mhm,
you're pumped up, right? Like, this is a game of Call of Duty. I've said from the beginning, Pete Hegseth treats our United States military like a game of
mhm,
Call of Duty, and now he's treating our Navy specifically like his own personal game of Battleship, and, "Oh, I sunk your drug boat. B2, I sunk your drug boat."
yeah,
And it's absolutely absurd, the lack of gravitas that that man brings to the role is putting our entire military in such an extraordinarily compromised position. What I read in the document that I was sent was not a clinical, organized. This was not a Nazi machine at work. This was chaos. The
mhm,
Marines didn't know the shipboard instruction. The officers involved were going back and forth, pulling instruction. People literally did not know what to do in the moment, and it caused such a breakdown of order. And so you're seeing the ineptitude of Pete Hegseth trickle down through the ranks where
yeah,
people are confused about what is a lawful order. Now you've got uh, politicians on the right that sees that video by Senator Mark Kelly and attempted to make that into a negative thing. To remind people to follow the rules is somehow a negative thing. And now you have lower enlisted men. Now, mind you, I've mentioned for several times over the past several years that Fox News has been the exclusive media outlet played on these Navy ships, in these
yes,
military installations. If there's a screen on a military base or a Navy ship, it's on Fox News. So everything our service members are hearing is through the lens of a twisted, warped right wing propaganda machine. And that was extremely evident in that document by the fact of the confusion that was demonstrated throughout the document. The fact that people didn't know, boom, right off the bat, that's an unlawful order. No, I'm not going to follow that order. The level
and
of confusion throughout it was embarrassing, and it showed just how compromised our military is right now.
agreed. And on top of that, every service member is briefed before a mission. Every member of a mission, every field operator, as they are called, someone who goes into the field and operates and does a military activity, a field operator, is briefed before the mission. We have mission command structure in the military. Every single branch, which means every member is briefed and knows the job of the person of the rank above them and the rank below them in case that somebody gets killed. You can assume mission command. Every single person in that mission knew ahead of time what the proper handling procedures of a detained individual would have been because they're all briefed on that, because they're all told. Most infantrymen are told, hey, if you pick, and I know that's somewhat different for Marines because there are different trainings. However, as I've heard and I know from experience and from what other people have said, is the thing that infantrymen and infantry like individuals are taught is the only thing you do is don't call them POWs because then they get extra status right away. Other than that, They're all told, here's the basic rules of how to handle a detainee. Here's how you detain an individual safely and so that you don't get charged with assault for assaulting someone too far. Um, and these rules
You
should
said
would have been
earlier
known.
that you literally put a paper to it is literally a paper tag that you put
Yeah,
on detainees.
yeah,
You can see a copy of it on the internet. In my research, I came across
yeah.
that
They're like little red like
yeah,
brake tags. They like
they're
literally
actual
are tags.
tags, right,
Yeah,
to
like
tag the detainee, and, when you've been in the military, I'm gonna get a little crude for a minute, but there's a saying in the Navy that you gotta run a chit to take a shit, man. There's a piece of paperwork for every action that you take in the military. There is a paper trail, a mile long. If you wanna go on vacation, you gotta run a chit up and get it signed by multiple people. So, the fact that 2 international detainees were brought onto one of our ships and the documentation was deleted is so grossly unbelievable and shocking and out of character for what our military stands for and its normal protocols. This is an egregious breach of protocol. It
yes.
cannot be overstated.
Not even an egregious breach of protocol, but an egregious breach of doctrine, which is law, is military law, basically. That's it's law, it's policy and doctrine is your law. And military doctrine states how you are supposed to treat, handle, and maintain detained individuals, no matter what status they are. It outlines it. It's very clear. The law of
Right.
war is not a complex document to read. It's made that way so service members who have a high school or who have a high school education at most can read it. Everything is supposed to be simple for a reason so that everyone is aware of exactly what you're to going to do. There's the law
Right.
of war and there's the law of maritime war. They are slightly different, but there's enough similarities, especially around these and the handling of detained individuals, because that's a universal law. That's an international law that we crafted, that we built. We made these laws. These are U.S. doctrine and law imposed on the international community since World War II. This is US policy that we are
Right.
now violating our own doctrine on just so that we can get rid of the 2 individuals who could have proven this entire need for an armed conflict of any sort,
Exactly.
and we release them.
We
We
release them.
let them go. Both of whom had been treated for medical injuries, who had been received and treated for medical wounds. It is
But think
against
what a
policy.
compromised position that puts our military in, our entire nation in. What a compromised position that you can't point to photo and video from the moment you brought that detainee. I mean, yeah, the guy survived a boat strike. Obviously, it's not surprising that there are medical injuries,
Yeah,
but we don't know the extent of the injuries caused by the boat strike. The condition that person was in from the moment he was in our custody should have been documented, and that documentation should not have been deleted
no,
so that when that detainee, after over 24 hours in our custody, gets sent back to his home country and his president is out here making a public announcement within moments, this guy was returned to us essentially comatose. Okay. If we had photos and videos of that entire 26-hour period, we could say, well, it wasn't, listen,
yep,
the boat strike got him, but he was not tortured or harmed in our custody. We have photo and video we can show you, which begs the question, was he harmed in
yeah,
our custody? And now we have no quantifiable evidence to show the world that that is not what happened. And so
yeah,
every single sailor, every single Marine that was in the space with that individual is now suspect due to no fault of
yeah,
their own because their leadership sold them down the river.
yeah. And this has, and we have, and I was asked this earlier while I was on with Rick Herbst and Lisa. Um, with their show, and he asked me bluntly, was because of the nature and the amount of deaths that have gone on and the confusion that has happened and the destructiveness and the lethal force that has been used, should everyone involved be possibly held up to the highest penalty of death, basically, for being part of this, for killing civilians? And my response to that is a qualified yes, because this is a command, especially from what is coming out and the reporting that Melissa and I are talking about, and the reporting that Melissa has provided to everyone, is this was a command structure incident. And this is a command related issue and not a service member specific one.
Right.
It is not a sailor or a Marine going, I'm going to just shoot this boat randomly and nobody's going to say anything. Or I'm going to just release these two detained individuals to two individual foreign countries. That is a command issue. And those types of things are highly, highly illegal and irregular. What we're doing is highly
Right.
illegal and irregular, because 24 hours is not enough time to really determine to do a competent tribunal like this without some sort of approval. Like
Right.
we don't just go and blow people up, and then if some are still alive, we then let them go.
Right.
That's the biggest problem of this portion, not
And
of all of it.
this document clearly lays this at the feet of the admiral. It states in no uncertain terms, I'm looking at it right now, the admiral ordered all VI to be deleted.
Which means that
And
order came
this
down
was
from someone else.
right, and this was October the 17th, and it's highly notable that on October 16th, Admiral Halsey said he was going to resign.
Yes, it is highly notable, and it is also highly not coincidental. There are
Right.
no coincidences when it comes to this. Admiral Halsey said no and lost his job for it. That would be why he was either removed or told he needed to resign, was because he said no, and he was not going to do that, and somebody else did, which means somebody gave that order down to the admiral. And the
Yes.
only one who could have done this in this way is Pete Hegseth, or a presidential directive, or a Stephen Miller behind the scenes shadow presidential directive. But it would have had to have been signed off by either the Secretary of Defense or the president for this type of action to happen.
Right.
And
Right.
we, just like Melissa said, one of the reasons we document everything isn't so that the admirals have cover. It's so all of us little people who were E5s, which is a sergeant or below, who are who are um, NCO to lower enlisted, like not in the command, it's to protect your ass. The
Right.
reason you document is so that if something does happen to an individual, you as the individual service member have stated proof with a secondary individual saying, yep, this person signed off. Because when you sign off on documents like this, it's not a single person sign off either. It is two people at least. There are two people who
Right.
sign off on these documents, because you can't just trust one. You have to verify. It's trust but verify. And so
Right.
when service members are handed orders like this, they don't know what to do, because they're being told by their training this is illegal. But
Right.
then they're being demanded by their officers that, okay, now you have to do this. Look, Admiral Halsey lost his job because he said no. Don't you dare say no either. That's what it comes down to, is they're going to look at that and go, well, this admiral lost his job for saying no. I don't want to lose my job. Like, I got to support my family, and I don't
Right.
want to go into the brig. So I'm going to follow this order because
That right
all of
there.
my leadership has told me it's the right thing to do.
Yes. That right
The
there is
leadership's fault.
that is why I have sunk my teeth into this and refused to let go until this came to the appropriate conclusion, and this document got where it needed to be. It got into that room in a closed door Senate Armed Services Committee meeting because it is incredibly fucked up to
Yes.
put enlisted men and women in a position to have to make a call that is far beyond their rank and their station. It is highly inappropriate, and it's just really fucked up to put our men and women, we've already got them sitting in the Caribbean Sea over the holidays. They've missed Thanksgiving. They're going to miss Christmas with their families. Some of these ships, there are 18 of our Navy vessels in the Caribbean with a total of 15,000 personnel attached to this mission, this alleged mission. I don't even want to give it that word because it's not a valid mission in my opinion. This is a
Piracy?
law enforcement action. And that's interesting that you said piracy because the definition that Brigadier General Watkin gave in one of his papers on unprivileged belligerents, and I'll have to get that definition for you, but the way that he described a terrorist is exactly the way the United States military is behaving in this moment. So I
Yeah.
thought it was really incredible that this expert on this topic, how he defines terrorist activity, is how our military is behaving right now. But again, this is a command level and a Southcom region level issue. This is not the fault of the lower enlisted men and women who are having to make these decisions on, away from their families. They're on the ship. They're in an incredibly vulnerable position where they don't feel like they can say no. And
Yeah.
even in that position, even thousands of miles away from their family, out on this ship, they did push back
Yeah.
and they did reach out and said, something stinks here. Something stinks and we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
So,
And
uh,
we don't know how many of those service members were possibly relieved of their duty for saying no,
right,
and for even requesting pushback, or
right,
requesting the support that they are legally authorized to have, which is you're allowed to request legal counsel if an order feels really illegal. Like if you
right,
just know that that order is illegal, you are allowed to request a legal counsel. Um, and
right.
we need to
And
start empowering service members to do that. And
right.
by giving them the truth that people out
You know
here
what? I'm going to
have their
drop in the
back.
chat actually. I've got the signal contact for the Orders Project. So this is a project where legal representation is standing by. Um, they have a signal chat. Let me get that so that if anyone on this chat has friends or family serving in Southcom right now and they themselves are uncomfortable with orders they've been given. Let me find that so I can get that. They can reach out and speak with legal representation that is specifically trained. Let's see. I know I have this.
Yeah, and I dropped the link too to their website. Glenn Kirshner has spoken about the Orders Project. Stephanie Wilson
Here we go.
just
Yeah.
had their legal director on for an episode of Freedom
Right.
Over Fascism. There's a
And you know
group,
what? He did confirm that they have had contact with personnel in Southcom. So
which
there
is
are
important.
whistleblowers coming forward and reaching out about this. Okay, it is at the orders project.76 and I'm dropping it in the chat. So if you have any active duty service member, family, friend that is in Southcom, there is the Signal. They can download the Signal app. From what we're seeing, people are still able to use that app. We've been communicating with individuals in Southcom with that app. So use that to get to those individuals if they are uncomfortable with orders they've been given, if they have feel like they've been given an unlawful order and had to follow it. They can reach out and get legal advice and potentially representation if they choose to come forward in a whistleblower status. We do have senators and congressmen that are active in the Armed Services Committee that are having meetings constantly on this topic. They are reviewing evidence and they are taking action. I believe our veterans that we have in elected office are stepping up to continue to honor their oath in the way that I am. We took the oath, and in the Navy, we also have the Sailor's Creed. And the 3 words that are pounded into us are honor, courage, and commitment. You do push-ups to them. You do sit-ups to them. You run to it. Honor, courage, and commitment. And we need all 3 of those in this moment. If you're a veteran and you wanna join us in this, then send us a message. Definitely subscribe to Banner and Backbone. We are reclaiming patriotism. We're taking it away from these right-wing nut jobs. And on that topic, I'm going to use this moment to challenge every Republican congressman or senator who's ever kissed a veteran ass for an ad or for a vote. You need to step up in this moment. You need to step up and do the right thing for these active duty service members floating out here off the coast of Venezuela, being forced to participate in activity that is outright unlawful, that they are uncomfortable with, and that goes against their oath. You have the power to stop it. You have the power to demand investigations. I want every single elected representative watching this video to go ask where those photos and video are. You need to blow this open. Okay?
Yeah.
This is what we elected you for. And as a veteran, I am telling you, you're going to lose the whole veteran community if you drop the ball on this.
And we're not going to stop reporting on this at Banner and Backbone. I know Melissa's not going to stop reporting on this. I have a feeling Blue Amp Media will not stop reporting on these types of things. I know others in our veteran community are not going to stop reporting on this. And in fact, we're going to report on it even more than we
Yep.
ever have. Next week, you're getting an interview with Melissa and I and retired Navy Commander Bobby Jones on Monday afternoon, where we're going to discuss this exact situation again. And then on Tuesday, we're going to bring on Army veteran and Nazi hunter Chris Goldsmith, who is going to talk with us about this same situation again. And we're going to talk about this over and over and over and
Right.
over until Congress does its job and the American people have accountability. Because that's what it's about, is it's about accountability and it's about following the law and following the Constitution. And if you're violating those, you need to be held to account for your actions, because actions have consequences and consequences are coming. And
Yeah.
if you're going to flagrantly violate the law and put our service members in harm's way because you're risking starting a real war, or you're risking starting a actual terror event on the service members in the Caribbean who are not trying to hurt people for the most part. 99.99% of these service members are just there because they have to be, because
Right.
they're told they need to be there and there's nothing else they can do. Like
Right.
that, the this is all about ensuring that they stay safe and the homeland stays safe, that that our country stays safe. Because when we go to war in a situation like this, if we try to instigate a war, if we try to instigate a armed conflict where there are real unprivileged belligerents and unlawful actors and unlawful combatants, that will cause harm to the US. In the US, we're in a dangerous place. Um, and I really, it's on Congress right now, and there are members in Congress who are actively doing their duty to stand up and do the right thing. It's on us to continue to demand our congressional members do that. Um, and it's really, really, um, it's really tough to um, get this it's tough to get this situation in um,
Yeah,
Um, in
crazy.
Yeah, it's we need to get past this situation and we need to hold people accountable for it.
Yeah.
Um, and
So
so,
we are over an hour now. I wanted to take the opportunity to thank Cliff and David so much for giving me the platform, the support, the encouragement, the 100%, uh, so incredibly supportive and helpful in handling this situation in the way that I knew to my conscience was the best way to handle this situation. This source came to me because he trusted me, and that is incredibly important and valuable to me to receive someone's trust in that way. And I went through every conceivable channel that I could think of to get this to the individuals that these sources were intent on getting it to, and they didn't want this to be a big press story. They wanted this to get in front of congressional hearings and meetings and people who actually have positions of power that could do something about it. And through the previous weeks, I've worked with a lot of incredible people who were able to make that a reality, to get this document where it needed to be so that it could have the greatest possible impact um, in the way that it needed to. A headline is just a blip, but getting it in front of our lawmakers was the entire purpose, and it also gives those sources that level of protection, because if they had gone straight to the press with this, they would have been eviscerated in their career. So my hope is that I have handled their trust in the way that they find appropriate, and that this situation can open the doors and open and shine light on all these little dark corners that are currently happening in our Department of Defense and in the Pentagon. And we can get rid of this absolute unserious clown of a SecDev. And if this action helps in that pursuit, then I'm good with it.
yeah, yeah, and that's really all it is I want to bring accountability where it's required and for those who actually need it and deserve it rather than those who are caught up in it because they have no other choice. Um, and Pete Hegseth has a choice, and he's
Right.
made some pretty shitty ones. And I hope that comes to his attention and holds him account for a long time for what he's done. Um, and yeah, and we're going to continue reporting on this and continue bringing out news about what's going on. Um, so at least for me, continue to listen to Banner and
Yep.
Backbone and what we're doing in the news that we're trying to get out, um, and trying to get information to everyone so that it can be reported truthfully, and quickly, and so that everyone's informed properly. Um, so, Melissa, I thank you for letting me come on and talk with you for a while about this.
Thank you so much for being willing to clarify all those terms that I get jumbled up a little bit and aren't so clear. You are so clear in describing every one of these terms, and you break it down in such relatable, understandable terminology that we can all understand what's going on. So I really appreciate you taking time on a Saturday night to come do this. And, we'll have much more to talk about this next week for sure.
Yes, we will.
All
It'll be
right.
good to see
Thank
you again,
you.
Melissa. Thanks,
Yes,
everyone.
definitely. Thank you so much, friend.
Have a good one.
All right, you too.
Bye.